Hi, and welcome to the Credit Union Evangelist channel. Glad you're tuning in to this video because we are spreading the good news about CUs or spreading the good news about credit unions. And we have an exciting topic on today entitled Credit Unions and CAMELS. Well, you're probably wondering, what do CAMELS have to do with credit unions? Well, in this video, we will take the time to explain exactly what is meant by credit unions and CAMELS. Well, let's go right to it. CAMEL ratings are an examination tool that's used by the National Credit Union Administration, or the acronym NCUA, who is the government regulator that evaluates the overall health and performance of credit unions. These ratings aren't public and they're not disclosed unless the NCUA determines that a disclosure of these ratings are needful. Although each credit union that's examined is aware of these CAMEL ratings, but they're not disclosed to the public. Well, you're probably wondering, well, if it's not disclosed to the public, what does that have to do with me as a member or a depositor? Well, you should know that these ratings, these CAMELS ratings, are an examination tool that is used to determine the health of the institution. And I am sure that you want your credit union to be healthy and performing well. So this is a metric that is used by the regulator, NCUA, to make that determination. Now, you're probably wondering, what does CAMELS stand for? Well, it's an acronym that stands for 6 components that assess the financial condition of the credit union. Let's start with the first. The C is for capital adequacy. And we're going to go into an explanation of these, a brief explanation, but nevertheless, we will explain what each of the letters in the acronym stands for. C standing for capital adequacy, A, asset quality, M is for management, E is for earnings, L is for liquidity, and S is for sensitivity to market risk. And as I mentioned, we plan to explore each of these particular components of CAMELS so that you can have a basic idea as to what is involved in how your credit union is examined. Let me also start out by saying each of these components have a metric or score between 1 through 5, with 1 being the best score and 5 being the worst score. Now, these ratings are important because they help to identify credit unions that may be experiencing financial difficulties and may need closer oversight by the regulator. Or it may assess that the credit union is performing well and is stable and sound. And every director, every executive manager needs to know how their credit union is performing. So let's break down these various components. We're going to start out with C, capital adequacy. Well, this measure determines the level of capital reserves a credit union holds as cushion against losses. Capital is like a safety net. It's almost like your personal stash, let's say, and you want to use it for a rainy day. So capital acts like a safety net, and it provides that cushion for credit unions. And the more reserves or capital the credit union has, the more secure it is against potential losses that may ensue. In financial institutions, you never know what disruptive forces can cause a financial institution like a credit union to handle or experience difficulty. But regulators assess whether a credit union has enough capital and enough to absorb potential losses, also to support its operations. And what's considered is the size and the risk level of the credit union's activities. Typically, this measure is a ratio, and the ratio is net capital or the net worth of the credit union. And a basic understanding of net capital in accounting 101 is assets minus liabilities equal capital. So, in a simplified sense, you are comparing your net capital to your total assets, or what percentage of your total assets is your net capital. And when this percentage is derived, the examiner then measures it against a particular rubric that is established to determine what the score is in this particular component of CAMELS and how well the credit union is capitalized. So now that we talked about capital adequacy, why don't we go briefly to asset quality? Well, this particular metric looks at the quality of a credit union's assets, primarily its loan portfolio and the investments. Those are typically the two assets that are carried on the books of credit unions. The loans that it issues, because those loans are issued with the cash on hand that the credit union holds, but also it's the interest that is gained as a result of those funds being loaned out, and the investments that the institution may purchase, be it securities or bonds. Those are investment assets. Now, when we look, or rather, the regulators look at these assets, they want to determine the quality of it. Why? Because that is important. It indicates the future losses and whether or not these loans, that other assets, can be repaid by those that are borrowing. So if I'm making, let's say, high risk loans, then there's a likelihood of there being default on those loans. So therefore, the asset quality is not good. Or if I invest in risky securities, like some institutions did during the financial crisis, the Great Recession, then that resulted in write-downs and the asset quality was poor. So this measure gives the regulators confidence that the investments, the loans, and the assets that are on the credit union's books are safe and sound and of good quality. And what do they look at? Sometimes they look at the ratio of delinquent loans to the total loans. How much of the total loan portfolio is in a delinquent status? How many loans are being charged off? That lets the examiner know the asset quality. And the quality of the assets on the books, if they become delinquent, are subject to devaluation. Same thing with investments. If they are of poor quality and they are potentially bad mortgages in these securities, then they have to be written down and as a result devalued, and it is carried as a loss on the books of the financial institution. So that's asset quality. Next is we're going to look at M, which stands for management. And this component assesses the ability and the effectiveness of the credit union's management team as well as its board of directors, because the board of directors is responsible for the general management, whereas executive management is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the credit union. But overall, good management is crucial for the successful operation of any credit union or any financial institution for that matter. This rating looks how well executive management, in conjunction with the board of directors, operating in their respective roles, are managing the credit union in a safe, sound manner. And that includes employing proper internal controls, conducting strategic planning, implementing effective policies and procedures, and that's just to name a few things. So that is what the regulators or the examiners look for when they are assessing management. They want to see if your policy manual is up to date, whether your procedures are being up to date. Are you in compliance with the respective laws pertaining to the credit union? So that's M for management. Next, we're going to look at E, which stands for earnings. Now, this refers to the credit union's profitability, how much net income is being realized by the institution. Earnings are important because they allow the credit union to build capital, fund operations of the institution, and it supports growth. Regulators look at how much a credit union earns and where these earnings come from and how sustainable they are, because you could be operating to achieve high net income, but it may be utilizing risky transactions or risky principles used to gain net income, and that is not necessarily sustainable. So you want to look at how earnings are realized in a sustainable manner. So typically, this is in terms of the measure of earnings. You would look at the ratio of net income to average total assets, otherwise known as your return on assets, because you want to know how your assets are doing, how they're employed to yield net income. And that earnings metric is then looked in the rubric, and the examiners would assign a score to determine how well your earnings are achieving and being realized. Next in our metric, in our CAMELS ratings, is the letter L, and that has to do with liquidity. Now, liquidity is a very important principle, especially for credit unions, because that determines how much cash or easily sellable the assets that you have on your books are able to meet its financial obligations, especially in unexpected situations. I mean, there are times where there may be high demands by the members, and you as an institution need to have your assets, your cash on hand and able to meet that demand. And if cash runs out, then you need to then go to your short-term assets so that they can then be liquidated in order to meet that demand. So this includes being able, again, to provide funds to members who wish to withdraw or even to borrow money. A lack of liquidity can lead to serious problems. It can include a failure to meet obligations, and we know that would just erode member confidence. So it's always good to have a high-performing liquidity measure in your ratings, your CAMELS ratings. And this can be measured by the percentage of long-term assets against total assets. So what percentage of your total assets are long-term? You don't want a high number of your assets or a high percentage of your total assets to be in long term, because it would be difficult to liquidate. If all of your assets are invested in real estate, you know it takes a long time before a real estate sale could commence and that you would actually realize the funds or the cash from those sales. So it's good to have a balanced portfolio when it comes to your assets so that the credit union remains liquid to meet member demands. That's L. So we have one more to go, and that's the S in CAMELS. And that has to do with the sensitivity to market risk. Now, this is a relatively new CAMELS component, because initially it was only CAMEL, the C.A.M.E.L. But because of the financial crisis in 2008, the regulators want credit unions and other financial institutions to be able to determine the sensitivity to market risk. And this assesses how sensitive a credit union's financial condition is to changes in market conditions, such as fluctuations in interest rates or in economic downturns. High sensitivity could mean that a credit union's earnings or capital could be severely affected by adverse market changes. Now, we see that right now with regard to the Fed hiking interest rates in such a short period of time. And you have credit unions and other institutions scrambling on how to have a balanced balance sheet so that the high interest doesn't cause severe losses due to interest rate risk. So typically how this is measured, you would measure the credit union's ability to take on risk and devising policies to identify, manage, and mitigate risk, as I mentioned, such as interest rate fluctuations. And therefore, it's good to have an interest rate risk policy in order to manage that. For instance, what the credit union's preparation and anticipation for things like interest rate hikes that I just mentioned. Finally, now that we have briefly talked about each of the components in CAMELS, each of the CAMELS components and ratings are assigned a score, as I mentioned earlier, 1 through 5, with 1 being the best score, 5 being the worst score. And if you get, as you get closer to 5, it indicates poor performance and that the credit union is operating at a high risk. And then once each of the components are assessed and scored by the examiner, then the combined score of the 6 or the 5 rather CAMEL ratings. Well, is it 6? CAMELS. Yes, the 6 components. That combined score is then determining the overall financial health of the organization. And credit unions want to have a combined low score that shows that they're operating safely and operations are sound and that they're performing at a high level. So in conclusion, I hope this was helpful in determining what why CAMELS are in credit unions. It's because it's an important supervisory tool that our examiners utilize, namely the NCUA, and if also your state examiners utilize uh, to determine the financial performance and health of a credit union. And they provide a structured way to evaluate key aspects of a credit union's operations and financial condition. And this helps to ensure the stability of not just the credit union, but also of the financial system, and it protects the members' interests who trust their credit union to operate in a safe and sound manner. Hope this was helpful and look forward to seeing you in my next video. Credit Union Evangelist signing off. Take care. Until next time.